On this course, we're going to be talking about a couple of different things. This course is essentially, this webinar is essentially a slightly shorter or vastly shorter version of our normal stress management course. So of course, when it comes to stress management, there are a number of things that we could get into. But what we're going to do is we're going to focus in on some key aspects so that we can deliver some real value in depth in the short time that we have available. So let's get into it. All right. The first thing that we are looking at is, what is stress? So for this answer, I wonder if I could get Eugenia. Eugenia, would you be able to give me just your basic understanding of stress? How do you define it?
Okay. From the top of my head, I would say, when you're in a situation of anxiety and, you fail to cope with, situations and a task ahead of you, and you just feel overwhelmed.
Yeah. Okay, excellent. So it's a task. It's maybe a little bit more than we can handle, and we get this feeling that it's just beyond us. All right, cool. Thank you very much. So, of course, it's good to have our own understanding of stress, but for a lot of us, stress becomes quite an abstract concept. We struggle to put our fingers on exactly what it means. Now, one of the weird things about stress is that stress is what some people call a meta concept. It's something that relates to your health. It relates to your work. It relates to your kids, your family. So we want to look at what the experts, what the scientists say on this matter. So we are looking at the definitions from scientists. So we have a man by the name of Joe Herbert. He's the professor of neuroscience from Cambridge University, and this is how he looks at the idea of stress. To his mind, stress is a process. So it starts out with either an unusual demand or a perceived threat or significance. So let's unpack those two ideas there. So let's turn to Joz. Joz, do you want to dive in there? How would you describe an unusual demand?
Unusual demand for me would be something that is outside of my experience, either personal experience or an experience, say, from either study or some kind of training. It's something that comes outside from my comfort zone, from things that I normally do without much effort. So that would be an unusual stress for me.
Okay, perfect. Lovely. Right. So that's exactly right. That's exactly what we're talking about. It's not just difficult tasks. It's not effort. It's effort that goes beyond either what we're comfortable with or something that has gone beyond what we believe that we've coped with before. I love the fact that you've included this idea that it's something that you can't just do mechanically. You have to put in extra effort. You can't just autopilot this particular task. Very, very good description. Now, on the next point there, the perceived threat or significance, that's kind of a two-parter. Now, based on the input from Nomvula, I think this is an interesting point to make there. So, Nomvula, you said that you are currently stressed right now because of the whole COVID-19 situation. You're worried about what might actually happen to you if you do become infected. Now, this is a beautiful example of a very sort of classical threat in the sense that right now there is a physical harm to your body, and as a result, your body is stressed, understandably so. But the question is, does this threat have to be physical? All right, so when it comes to perceived threat, we're not just talking about to your physical person, we're also talking about this perceived threat to something that you might own. It might even be something fairly abstract like your sense of importance, your status. If you feel like some action or some sort of circumstance might harm your status in the eyes of others, that's going to stress you out. So when we talk about a perceived threat, it can be a perceived threat to your social standing with your family. It can be a perceived threat to your job, not just because you're worried about losing money, but because you're worried about the embarrassment of the whole situation. So there's a lot more that can cause stress besides physical harm. But of course, physical harm is a significant contributor. Then we also notice that it says perceived threat or significance. Now, this is a point that I think is very, very important when it comes to stress. We get stressed out by things that are not just dangerous, but we also get stressed out by things that we just perceive as being important, things that are dear to us, if you will. If I may reference another trainer who sometimes does work for us by the name of Carl Spies. One day I saw him getting fairly worked up, and he said, "Ooh, I'm sweating, before this course tomorrow." Whew. So I said to him, "Oh, are you feeling nervous?" He said, "No, I'm getting ready." And that's because he had a different interpretation of stress. He had an understanding that stress is not just an indication that something makes us feel afraid, but that it's something that we feel is important and we need a gearing up for. So it's important to note that stress comes from not just bad situations. Next up, we have the third part of the process, the response. So our response can either be physiological, emotional, or cognitive, or actually, to be more precise, it's all three every single time. In other words, we have a physical response. You feel the stress response. You become jittery. You have an emotional response. You describe yourself as being anxious, perhaps. And we have a cognitive response. We begin to think different thoughts. And lastly, we have the result. And that result is either adaptation or failure. And often that comes at a cost. So in order to adapt to the new stress, we must give something, whether that's effort or a change in schedule or time, but there's a cost to adapting to the stress. Now, of course, that's looking at what our definition of stress is. We're looking at what we mean by managing that stress. Now, of course, when it comes to stress management, the very first step in any procedure is the elimination of unnecessary stresses. So let's see if we can turn to some examples. Let me maybe ask Lena. Lena, if you're willing to jump in and answer on this, what would you say is an unnecessary stressor? In other words, something that stresses you out that's not necessary. You shouldn't let it get to you.
Okay. For me, usually in my department, being a sales consultant, it would be getting a client that's actually upset, and me also wanting to be upset at the same time with the client.
Okay.
And with which I would actually be like try and sort out the situation better by not trying to be angry as well, even though the client is wrong and I'm correct. But so for me not to stress about that, I have to at least try and calm down and, try and sort out the situation better. Because if I stress myself as well as the client is stressed, then it's actually an unnecessary stress for me.
And it's probably going to escalate the situation as well.
Yeah, the client would also get more angry, and it will have to involve other people as well in the matter. So I try my best to always calm down before I speak to the client or before I respond to whatever could be the query. Yeah.
Okay, all right, excellent. So obviously work is always a good example to use stress, because that's where we spend a large portion of our day. It's where we spend a large portion of our time worrying. So one of the things that we want to look at in those sorts of scenarios is what is unnecessary stress versus what is necessary stress. So when it comes to work, there's plenty of necessary stress. Right? We have to get jobs done. We have to deal with clients. We have to deal with suppliers. And sometimes those interactions are difficult, and sometimes they're pleasant and they're easy. But a lot of the time, we've got to fret over it. But there are elements to that which we don't need to concern ourselves with. So we don't need to continuously think about whether we were right or they were wrong, all of those sorts of things. So a large part of our stress management is eliminating unnecessary stress. Now, for a lot of us, our unnecessary stress might fall outside of the work environment. It might fall into our personal lives. It might fall into sort of what we see as little things like injustice. So, for example, if you get cut off in traffic and we go, oh, he was wrong for doing that. He might be. You might be absolutely right. They're breaking the law, whatever it might be. But the question is, was getting stressed in that situation worthwhile? And if the answer is no, then that's something that we need to look at eliminating. So half the job of stress management is this elimination. But the other half is dealing with the stress that we cannot avoid. So we're looking to change our response to stress because, of course, we have to deal with people. We have to deal with environments. We have to deal with diseases which come out of nowhere, which stress us out. So this course is going to focus on what your response is and how we can perhaps try and mediate that response. So let's look at that now. First part, we want to look at some of the unusual demands. So in order to manage our response to stress, we need to know where stress is coming from. So a couple of areas that it could be coming from: time demands. Do you have less time to deal with what you need to deal with? Are you working on deadlines? Do you feel like time is running out, like there's insufficient time to get what you need to do done in the day? Is it a difficulty issue? Is it that you feel like this is beyond your capability? Or is it even something physical? Now, this is a big one that I want to focus on here because this can genuinely affect our emotional response. So I don't know about you guys, but I tend to find when I get a little bit sick, a little bit under the weather, I'm a little bit grumpy. And it's inexplicable. Maybe I haven't even sneezed yet. Maybe I haven't coughed yet. But there's something niggling at me. I'm grumpy for no apparent reason. Very often, that is a precursor to becoming sick. So when we have these various factors impacting our body, it can add to that stress response. And we need to know the source of the stress so that we can apply the right remedy. If it's time, we need to look at time management. If it's difficulty, we need to look at upskilling, or maybe even delegation. Or if it's illness, we need to apply physical changes. Perhaps it's a change in diet. Perhaps it's a change in sleeping patterns, or just taking a sick day and going to the doctor. There's many, many, many things we could potentially do. All right. Now, remember we said that stress can be perceived threat, or it can be significance. It can be something important. What we mean by that is that there's a very thin line between anxiety and excitement. So let's maybe see someone who hasn't spoken in a while. Lawrence, how are you doing over there? Can you hear us? What would you say is the difference between anxiety and excitement?
I think, hi everyone. I think anxiety is when you are worried and you don't really know what is going to happen next. So most of the time it has something to do with the tomorrow, the future. And you are a bit worried, but excitement is a feeling of contentment where you feel like, there's really nothing to be anxious about. So I think it's the opposite.
Okay, cool. I'm glad you brought that up because I want to ask you a follow-up question to that. So, Lawrence, you're a married man, yes?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So when you were getting married, could you have defined yourself as being excited?
I was
not anymore. Excited, has it changed? Yes. Oh dear.
Yeah, I was excited.
Okay,
I was very excited, but leading up to the event, there was anxiety.
Okay. All right. Okay, cool. Thanks very much. All right. So that's an excellent scenario, guys. When we talk about something like a wedding, it's often listed as a stressful event, not because it's something that we don't enjoy, something that we don't want or desire. In fact, for many people, it's one of the sort of more memorable points in their lives, but it's something which causes stress. So this is something that's very, very interesting when we talk about the topic of stress. Stress is neither good nor bad. It is Stress. It's a physiological response to do something. So if we're getting married, we know that there's this big change coming up. It's really important. We have to pay attention to the event, to people, to all of these lists that we need to tick. And that adds to our anxiety. So in that moment, we're not sure. Am I anxious? Am I excited? And the truth is that there's only a very small mind shift difference between the two. It's between what you expect. In one case, we're expecting something good. In one case, we're expecting something bad. All right, so we want to know a little bit more about what's actually happening on the back end, what's happening to us in this moment. So we're going to talk about this model called the Triune Brain. So this is our physiological, emotional, and cognitive response. So some of you might have come across the Triune Brain before. It's a bit of an older model. It's obviously not very intricate because the word triune just means three-part. So we're looking at these three parts of the brain. It's an oversimplification, but it gives us a little bit of insight. So we're going to start off talking about the reptilian brain. Now, I'm going to use a slightly different term to describe it. I'm going to call this the safety brain. And the reason why I want to call it the safety brain is because that's sort of its functionality. When we talk about the safety brain, we're saying this is the part of your brain that perceives and assesses danger. So there's this little part of your brain, it's sort of the size of an almond. It's called the amygdala. And that has, well, I suppose it might have a couple of jobs, but it's got one very specific job, and that is to perceive a threat. So what that means is every time you look at something, anything, your brain immediately assesses, is this dangerous or is it safe? All right, so that's the part of the brain there. That's your reptilian brain. So the reason why we call it a reptilian brain is because it's kind of like a lizard. The lizard just sits there all day trying to find food, trying to run away, trying to make sure it stays safe. That's your reptilian brain. Okay, now the next part of the brain we talk about, you'll see they call the mammalian brain or the emotional brain. I'm going to use that term rather because once again, we're talking about functionality. So when I look at the mammalian brain, the emotional brain, we're saying this is the part of your brain that feels. Now, the reason why we use that term feels is because that's how we register emotion. If you guys think about how you would describe emotion, you would say, I feel angry or I feel sad. We don't describe it in different terms. We don't say to ourselves, yes, I realize that my serotonin levels are quite low today, resulting in a feeling of unease. We don't say that. We say, I'm feeling quite low, I'm feeling quite flat. Right, so we feel our emotions. And the reason why I want you guys to focus on that is because that's our little trigger to note that that part of our brain has been engaged. Super important. Then the next part of our brain is the analytical brain, the new brain, the cortex, the prefrontal cortex. I'm going to use the word rational brain to describe this. Once again, because it is rational. It's the part of our brain that is able to interpret data. It's able to look at a situation and go, I was initially frightened by that dark spot on the wall that I thought was a spider, but upon further investigation, I realized that it is just a piece of cotton. Right? That's your rational brain, your analytical brain. Now, you'll notice that that brain doesn't work on feelings. That brain works on words. I like to call this the narrative brain because it's the part of us that tells ourselves a story. So when you are thinking about something and you're thinking about something in depth, we use story to understand and to bring to life the meaning hidden behind a situation. All right. Now, what's important is not just understanding the different parts here, it's understanding that they interact with one another. So very importantly, when we look at this model, we need to know that they chat. So for example, when we have the reptilian brain noticing that there's danger, it notices that something might perhaps cause a threat to you, it communicates with the emotional brain to stir up this response. We need a response. And if you're wondering why I've included the adrenal glands there, because that response then goes to your adrenals. and produces something called cortisol, which we're going to look at in a second. Now, that then communicates to your rational brain, to your new brain. So we have this communication from the reptilian brain to the emotional brain to the thinking brain. And what happens is that begins to change your thoughts. So let's take, for example, the very simple situation of having to do a public speaking event. So you look at the scenario, you look at the fact that there are a lot of people in this big room about to listen to just you. And your amygdala goes, oh gosh, I'm so nervous, I'm so afraid, I see all these people, that's a big threat. And you get this feeling created by your emotional brain. And that communicates to your rational brain, to your thinking brain, to say, oh dear, we're unprepared for this, we should run away. Why did we think that this was a good idea? This was never a good idea. We should definitely change back and then just get away from this. This is terrible. All right, so that's the flow from the reptilian brain to the rational brain. But the cool thing is we can change the direction. So we can communicate to our reptilian brain, to our safety brain, using our story. So effectively, we can tell ourselves a different story. And that's what we're going to be looking at a little bit later on in the course. Now, to continue the topic of talking about cortisol, sorry, I just see we're running out of time. If it seems like I'm rushing ahead, apologies. Now, I'm guessing almost no one here knows the gentleman that I have in front of us here. If you are wondering, this is Rich Piana. He's a very famous bodybuilder. Unfortunately, rest in peace, George Piana. Rich Piana. George Piana? Rich Piana, sorry. Rich Piana, unfortunately dead because of his overuse of steroids. Now, you might be wondering, why on earth do I have a picture of this man on the page? And you'd be right to wonder. The reason is, it's because cortisol is a steroid. Now, cortisol is often understood as one of the major stress responses. It's one of the major hormones that's released during your stress response. So we want to understand a little bit more about this, because this obviously might lead you to the conclusion that something like cortisol is bad for you. But that's not the case whatsoever. In fact, the idea of cortisol is it's a regulatory steroid. So it helps to control your blood sugar levels. It helps to regulate your metabolisms, helps to control your blood pressure. It even assists in pregnancy and the development of a fetus. So this is a very, very, very important chemical that is naturally produced by our body. But the interesting thing is, when we get stressed out, your body produces more of this. So the idea here is that we're not looking for the eradication of stress, but rather the management of stress. If you guys are familiar with the idea of any sort of poison, you'll know that every single poison is only a poison in a certain amount. What that means is something as healthy as water can very quickly turn to a poison if you drink, I think, about 6 to 8 liters of it. Or something like botulinum toxin, which is one of the most deadly substances known to man, can be useful if you're using it for, say, Botox. So cortisol also has its healthy limits and its unhealthy limits. So just like Rich Piana took too many steroids and unfortunately died, so too can we overdose on cortisol. And it's that which we are trying to deal with. So as Lawrence says in the chat there, we're not looking for the eradication of stress, but the management of stress. Absolutely. Now, one of the things to note about your cortisol is it does naturally fluctuate throughout the day. We actually have a very normal cycle of this. So as you can see, early in the morning, we have a bit of a spike. So perhaps you guys have experienced this. If you've ever woken up in the morning and you kind of feel really stressed out and you have no idea why, it's almost like just the very act of getting out of bed was an attack on your body and your mind, and your heart is racing and beating. That's why. Because your body naturally produces cortisol in the morning with the sole purpose of getting you awake. So as you can see, we peak around about 6 to 8 o'clock, and then for most people, it begins to decline throughout the day. given the idea that obviously nothing stressful then happens to you subsequently. So it's very, very, very important to note that your cortisol levels, your stress levels are there for a reason. They're good. They're useful. You need to be a little bit stressed. All right. So here's how I like to describe it. The opposite of stress is not relaxation. The opposite of stress is boredom. We don't like not being stressed. We need a little bit of stress in our lives. We said that stress management is about changing mindset. Or changing our response rather. So when we talk about changing these mindsets, I like to use the analogy of going from prey to predator. So picture the scenario, if you will. Let's use the image that we have on the screen now of the cat and the mouse. All right. Now, if we look at both of these animals, we could potentially say that both of them in this moment are stressed. Although, to be honest, looking at the shot, it looks like the mouse hasn't quite yet realized that its life is hanging in the balance and hasn't yet had a stress response, but very soon will. If we look at the prey and the predator, the prey is going to have this massive adrenal response, this cortisol response. Why? Why do you think that is? Let's ask that question of, let's see who we have on our list of attendees here. I'm going to ask that one of Mvula. Mvula, why would you say that a stress response is occurring in the mouse in this given scenario?
The mouse is looking very scared.
Yeah?
And the eyes of the cat are just frightening.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Okay, so is there any usefulness, Mvula, in the mouse being afraid? Is being afraid in this situation a good thing for the mouse?
Yes.
How so?
Cats play with mice and sometimes they kill them. So in this instance, the mice has to find a way of running away from the cat.
Exactly. Thank you very much. Okay, so this is where we come to the point of talking about cortisol as a steroid. So when people chat about sort of, I suppose we could say recreational steroids or anabolic steroids, they often use the term performance-enhancing drugs. And essentially, that's what cortisol is. It's a performance-enhancing drug. It's what your body uses to get itself pumped up. So remember, we looked at the functionality. We saw that it changes your blood pressure. It changes your metabolism, basically the way your body produces energy. So when you get frightened, when you get stressed out, your body is trying to charge you up, but it's trying to charge you up to do something. It's trying to empower you, if you will. All right, so that's very important to keep in mind. But then we also have the cat on the other side of it. Now, the cat is not necessarily in fear of its life, but that doesn't mean it's not stressed, right? In trying to do something, in trying to exert yourself, you become a little bit stressed out. So if there are any sportsmen amongst you in the webinar today, you might have had a similar feeling when you were about to go onto the field, when you were about to start a match or a game. You might have gotten a feeling of butterflies in your stomach. You might have felt slightly anxious, and yet it's something that you wanted to do. It's because your body knew that there was something of significance that you needed to do in this moment. So both these animals are stressed out. One of them, however, thinks it's going to be lunch. The other one is hoping that it will be lunch. So this is the key difference here. So what I would like to ask you guys to do going forward from this course is ask yourself, am I thinking like prey or am I thinking like a predator? Now here's an explanation of what I mean by that. Are you thinking about what you might potentially lose in any given situation? Or are you thinking about what you might gain? Does that make sense to you guys? I hope it does. So think about how you can earn something as opposed to how you might lose something. So let's take the example of public speaking once again. If you are thinking about how you might embarrass yourself in front of everyone, you're going to feel anxious. If you are thinking about how you might impress everyone, you'll feel excited. It's stressful, but exciting. It's good. That is the change in mindset that we are looking for from this prey to predator. I see that Enoch says the cat is going through the physiological part of stress. Absolutely. Absolutely. Its body is going to go through all of those changes to make sure that it is at peak performance. That's why they have the wide-eyed expression. They sort of look a bit intense, a little bit crazy, because they're stressed out, essentially. Okay. Now, stress is good. This is what we're trying to establish here. Stress is important. You guys need to be stressed. I know that sounds very counterintuitive. You need to be stressed. But of course, one of the major reasons why I'm sure you guys are here is because you, as well as I, know that stress can get the better of us, right? There's a healthy level of stress management. That's what we're looking at. Now, what we're going to be looking at here is how we can manage that level to make sure it stays at a healthy place. And we're looking at that in the context of rumination. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with what rumination is, it's actually based off what cows do and other animals known as ruminants. Don't ask me which animals fall into that category. I don't know. Goats, maybe, I think. What happens is these animals will eat the grass, they'll eat the fodder, whatever it might be, and they will chew over it, they'll swallow it, regurgitate it back up, chew it again, swallow it back down. It's often what people refer to as chewing the cud, right? So this is rumination. So when we talk about rumination, we're obviously not talking about digestive tracts. We're talking about your thought process. So what we're saying here is that when you encounter a stressful situation, sometimes we take the stressful situation, hits us, we have our physiological response, but then we vomit it back up and we chew over it again and again and again. Jacob, would you be able to give us an answer? What does it mean to you? What does it mean to ruminate on a stressful thought?
Okay, in my understanding, to ruminate is maybe to not get out of something, like you take it back and back, yet you have maybe learned something out of it. You just need to go forth and then get away with it. But if you ruminate, something has happened, and then you come back and think about it over and over and over, and then which can cause even more stress. That's
Absolutely
my
right.
understanding.
Perfect description. Absolutely. Thank you very much. So I like the fact that you talk about learning from something initially. So that's very important, because when we talk about stressful events, one of the functions, you might have seen it, sorry, I forgot to say it out loud. One of the functions that cortisol does is it helps to manage your learning, your memory. And that's because if something stressful happens to you, you better remember it, right? So that you don't have to deal with that problem again, or maybe you better deal with that problem. So the fact that we think about the stuff that's happened to us, the fact that we think about stressful events is not a bad thing. It's a brilliant thing. It helps you to learn from it and move on, just like you described, Jacob. The problem is when we don't move on. So the problem is when you've thought about it, but now you just can't stop thinking about it. And this is going to affect different people differently. All right. So for example, for me, this is a bigger issue than it might be for others. I tend to dwell on things. I want to think about it and understand it. And this can become a big problem, because every time you think about a stressful situation, your brain begins to simulate it. And it runs the simulation so well that your body thinks it's back in that stressful situation. So let's say you had a confrontation with another driver in traffic, and he cut you off and you went, "Arr!" and he went, "Arr!" back at you, and then you got all flustered and angry. It's very acceptable to be angry in that situation, right? Somebody threatened you, you felt uncomfortable, your body has a physiological response. Cool. But what most likely happens is that you go home and you see that guy's face in front of your eyes again. Oh, and you feel that anger once more. And that's just not healthy. That's not helping us to move on. So what happens is we get this circular thought pattern that keeps on going, and it just keeps pushing this little button that says, feel stressed out. Or maybe it's not an anger issue. Maybe it's dealing with something like the pandemic. Or maybe it's not the pandemic. Maybe it's the protest actions happening, or anything. We can think about it. Go mull over it, understand it. But once you've dealt with it, move on. Because if you don't, what's going to happen is that you're just going to keep pushing the little button to make that stress come back. So we need to look at a couple of ways that we can deal with this. The first one is very simple: distraction. When you encounter repetitive thoughts, cyclical thoughts, sorry, losing my English there. When you encounter these thoughts, throw your attention somewhere else. So think about anything else. Think about cheese grilled sandwiches. Think about a book that you read. Think about the TV that's playing in front of you. There's no harm. Binge watching Netflix. Yeah, exactly. Binge watching Netflix is a great one. Sorry, that's in the chat there. If you're wondering why I'm suddenly voicing other ideas. Yeah, so that's a great example. You want to break the chain. However you can break the chain, it does not matter. Right. Now, one thing to note, though, is we're not saying don't deal with issues. Absolutely deal with issues. But once you've dealt with it, distract. Okay. Very, 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 very important. Okay. And then the second one, and this is the one we're going to dive into just a little bit more depth, is the idea of mindfulness. So I'm going to turn this question to, let's hear from Joz. Joz, have you heard of the word mindfulness before?
Well, I think it's one of the most commonly used ways, people saying, be mindful of this, be mindful of this. So mindfulness simply, I think, means focus, concentrate, always be alert on a particular thing, yes.
Okay, cool. All right, thank you very much. Absolutely. So mindfulness is this alertness. It's this attention. Now, we're talking about mindfulness in a very particular context, and that context is in your attention and your focus. Essentially, we're talking about your perception of yourself. So if you'll notice there, my caption reads, mindfulness, noticing yourself. Not noticing yourself, because, if you walk past a reflection, you notice yourself. Not the same thing. Noticing yourself. Basically, your understanding of who you are and how you respond to the world around you. Now, if you're wondering why I've used the particular picture that I've got for this slide, there's a very good reason for it. It's not just because it's a pretty woman and that attracts attention, although that is a good use in and of itself. I've used this picture because of an analogy of a man by the name of Sam Harris, who is also a neuroscientist. So his description of being mindful is a little bit like looking out of a window. When you're looking out of a window, you're usually not looking at the window itself. You're looking at the things beyond it. And this is pretty much how we go through most of our daily lives. We look at the dog running outside, we look at the trees, we look at the sky, we notice all of the various things there. But every now and again, we catch a glimpse of our own reflection looking through the glass. And we realize that the world is not just outside, but it's us perceiving the world and understanding the world, and we're having a response to that stimulus. So that is what mindfulness is. It's noticing yourself in the reflection, or how you are responding to it. A lot of people will use another term to describe this, a very useful term. They will talk about being present. Now, being present, very simple idea. Essentially, when you worry about something, you're usually worrying about something that's going to be in the future, or you're worrying about something that has already happened in the past. In both of those scenarios, you're not living right now, you are simulating the future, or you are simulating the past. Pardon me. So, when we are simulating the future and simulating the past, we begin to stress out because our body simulates it so very well that it goes, oh, that meeting that I'm worried about tomorrow, it's almost as if I'm already there. And that begins to create that stress response. So what we can do is distract ourselves. Absolutely. Great idea. But what we can also do is practice this idea of being here, right here and now. So imagine, if you will, that you are stressed out about what's going to happen to your salary, or what's going to happen with the coronavirus epidemic or whatever it might be. But you're sitting currently at dinner with your family. Now, the environment that you are in is safe. It's a perfectly nice environment. It's a good environment to be in, hopefully. But the environment that you're simulating, the problem, that's not a safe environment. So what we do is we end up spending all this time living in the simulated, horrible environment, even when we're in the nice place. So the idea of being mindful is to try and help you draw your attention back to right here, right now, so that you can enjoy the peaceful moments when there are peaceful moments. It's to help control your focus, control your attention, so that we don't ruminate and think about things that we shouldn't. All right, now, if that's not a good enough analogy for you, perhaps you'll like this last one that I'm going to end off with, and that is the idea of entertaining the monkey brain. So this actually comes from the Buddhist practice of meditation. That's why they use the reference of the monkey. Because if you think about a monkey, it's very chatty, it's very energetic, always going places, always wanting to do something, always wanting to find something to do. And that's what our brain can be like. So when we are getting stressed out, it's our brain looking for something to do. Oh, I remember you had that conflict with that person. Let me grab onto that. It's trying to find something to stimulate itself. So what we do is we try to give our little monkey inside of our head, we give it a task, and we say to that monkey, all right, I want you to focus on something. Because if you try to focus on nothing, it's not going to work. You guys could, maybe you've tried it, maybe you've tried to meditate and go, clear your mind. And as you might have found, as I have found, does not work. So instead of trying to clear our mind, we give our mind a task. And that task is going to be something as simple as focusing on your breathing. So what we're going to do now, and you guys don't have to turn on your mics or anything like that. You can just sit with me here. What we're going to do is we're going to focus on our breathing. So what I'd like you to do, wherever you are, if you're sitting, if you're lying down, just make sure you're nice and comfortable. Don't get yourself in a twist or anything. You don't have to get into the half lotus position. All that I'd like you to do is sit comfortably. Now, you don't even have to close your eyes for this. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to lead you through a very simple, very basic mindfulness practice. First thing I'd like you to do is I'd like you to focus on your breathing. So I don't mean controlling your breath like, I just mean I want you to think about it. So tell that little monkey inside your head to think about your inhale and your exhale. So in, out. Focus on your breathing. In, out. In, out. Now, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to turn your attention to something else that's physical. So try to find something texture-based. Sorry, that's not the right word. Try to find something that has texture around you. It can be the tabletop. It can be an object. And I'd like you to just run your hands over it. Just give it a bit of a feel. Examine it. Look at the various sides, dimensions. Take it in, essentially. Use that feedback from your fingertips. Just be aware of the object. Even if it's just your chair. And once you've experienced the object, go back to focusing on your breathing. So let's focus on that in and that out. And in and out. Now I'd like you to turn your attention to your body. So I'd like you to feel from your toes all the way through to your head. So what do your toes feel like in your shoe? Are you not wearing shoes? Are your feet cold? Are they hot? Are they clammy? Feel what those toes feel like and begin to move your attention up through your legs. Is there tension in your calves? Have you been doing a lot of walking since the lockdown ended? Are your knees a little bit sore? Have you had trouble with those before? Is your bum getting sore in your seat because we've been chatting for so long? Is your back stiff because you're maybe lying at a strange angle? Is your neck holding tension? Is your jaw holding tension? Focus on all of these various areas. What does it feel like to inhabit your body? Then, if you do notice any tension in a particular area, just let it go. So, for example, like myself, I hold a lot of tension in my jaw. So if you feel your jaw is very tight, just relax your jaw. Let it open up a little bit more. Very simple. And now turn your attention back to your breathing. In and out. And in and out. Now, I'd like you to turn your attention to your thoughts. Over the practice of this meditation, and perhaps even over the course, your brain probably will have been distracted by various ideas. Maybe it's things that you've got to do. Maybe it's events that are happening. What are the thoughts that wanted to occupy your mind space? What were the concerns? I'd like you to just take a second to think about what those concerns were. List them in your head. I'll give you guys a few seconds to do that. Excellent. And now return your focus to your breathing. In, out. In, out. Okay, excellent. Thank you very much if you did join me in on that. So we've got a lovely response from Enoch there saying, surrounding yourself in the present without judgment. That's his definition of mindfulness, where you adapt to the situation by finding a way out or how to move forward. Meditation is one mindfulness tool. And you're absolutely right. Mindfulness is a habit. It is not necessarily one particular type of practice. For example, you can be practicing mindfulness by thinking about the piece of food that you're eating. So if you're like me, you might have the habit of eating dinner in front of a movie. It's a perfectly peaceable activity. However, what you might notice is that you don't pay a lot of attention to the food. Don't stay mindful of the experience. So we can be more mindful by just allowing ourselves to experience our everyday. What does it taste like when I eat my food instead of just gobbling it down because I need to get to a deadline and I've got to rush off? What did it feel like on your tongue? What did it taste like? What was the experience? All of this helps us to be here, not in the simulated future. Okay. So guys, that is all from me tonight. And oh, look at that timing, 6 o'clock on the dot. I'm really glad that you guys could join us here. As I said, this is a bit of a smaller version of our full stress management course, which usually runs for one day. It's around about 6 hours from 9 until 4. We are going to be having a full stress course coming up. I believe it's on the 22nd of July. You guys can find out on the schedule if you are interested. And we have a promotion running. So if you guys use the password StresslessJuly, you guys can get 20% off the full stress management course. So if you're interested in that, you guys can go ahead and contact training@ledge.co.za, or you can get us on the phone number there, 011-656-4233. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us. We, of course, expect nothing from you in return, but just to go forth and spread the good news of mindfulness and all these wonderful things. But thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you have a lovely night further.